Yeah, Justin, you are chopped liver. Hey everyone, and welcome to another Range Rant. I'm Archer9234. Today I'll be discussing episode 19 from Power Rangers Turbo, Passing the Torch Part 2. Again, just like Part 1, this episode is adapted from episode 18 of Car Ranger, but just the monster and the end Zord fight footage. But other than that, the main story is American made only. Now the episode resumes right where we left off, where we see that Tanya, Adam, and Justin are having their issues with the Flamite monster. Between the two parts, eventually the Rangers finally get all their turbo keys and they're finally actually able to morph. But I do like to point out a little technical issue. Tanya actually said, I finally got my morpher. No, you actually got your turbo key. You were correctly saying turbo key in the first part, but in the second part they accidentally said turbo morpher. Now eventually Tanya, Adam, and Justin finally morph. Although it was kind of weird because, again, remember back in part 1 when Tanya and Adam didn't morph when they were running toward Justin? This time they actually remembered to morph while they were running away from the Flamite monster. So eventually when they finally morphed, they took out their personal weapons and tried to attack the Flamite monster, and unfortunately this was unsuccessful. But at the last minute, Adam realized, well, there's water over there near our campsite, and they actually used it to douse on the Flamite monster, and that was able to get him away. Now we finally head back to, Divatox, and we see that Tommy's basically tied up. Divatox is gloating on Tommy. She finally captured him, and of course she's going to make him suffer from all, all the failures that they've done for the past 18 or so episodes, and plus the movie. The funny thing though about the scene is that Rygang and Elgar actually had brains for a change. Normally in every superhero show with every bad person, we always have this cliche thing where, the evil person has to make the character gloat and take his revenge on all his failures, and this is where they usually screw up. But what's funny is that Rygang and Elgar actually used their brain and actually said, well, how come we just don't finish him off? And of course Divatox automatically fails them up, but she says, I'd just rather him just to suffer. Now, eventually, Divatox's mother comes in and basically uses her special magic abilities and summons this special dark void. And we basically get a little bit more backstory of this. We basically find out that, Divatox's father was actually captured inside the dark void as well. I assume he did something wrong. Maybe he tried to turn good. Maybe he was a person who didn't like that Divatox and her mother were trying to conquer planets, so they just banished him into the dark void as well. So eventually Divatox, Rygang, and Elgar return to the submarine, and of course Tommy is left there to eventually fall into the void by the mouse that's eating on the line. Now, fortunately enough, Divatox did have some brains and actually left some Piranatrons in the cave. But there are times where bad guys will not leave their minions over there. Now, we head back to TJ and Cassie. Now, they were been fighting this entire time with the Piranatrons. They're basically totally exhausted. They're eventually going to pass out. Fortunately enough, at the last minute, the other three Rangers finally arrive on the scene and actually get the Piranatrons to finally leave. Eventually, all the Rangers finally regroup into the command center, and of course, Demetria and Alpha 6 are finally apprised of what's been going on. And we basically see on the viewing screen that the monster has already enlarged itself and is basically attacking the city. Now, obviously, this is part of Divatox's plan in order to preoccupy the other Rangers in order to not locate Tommy. Now, I do like to point out the majority of this footage is actually American-made. This is not actually footage from Super Sentai. They are actually using the miniature set from MMPR Season 3 to film all this. The main reason why this happens is because in Car Rangers, this entire episode was totally different. The Flamite monster in Car Rangers was actually very comical. It was a very lighthearted, funny episode about, usually in Car Rangers, the monsters dealt with food. So that was the main premise of the episode. Since this would have not worked at all for the episode, especially since, again, the Red Ranger was not missing in the episode, so they couldn't use the actual Turbo Ranger footage until the very end of the episode. Now, while the Rangers are trying to devise a plan of what to do with Tommy and dealing with the monster in the power chamber, we get all of a sudden introduced to this hourglass thing. Personally, I never understood why they did this. I understand this two-parter episode was a very pinnacle and important moment to PR history because this is basically the very first time that all the original cast members since the beginning are finally leaving the show. The thing though is that it came out of nowhere. We didn't get any build-up to this. That was one of the main issues with the first half of the series. Writers thought, well, since the 4 cast members are actually going to leave, what's the point of developing their characters? But this would have been a perfect place to actually, develop the characters a little bit more backstory, and to set up the whole, hourglass thing, transferring of the powers and actually showing on camera that the cast is going to leave. So unfortunately, since the Flamite monster is actually damaging the city severely, the Rangers have to take an unfortunate choice and actually head to the Flamite monster and not head to Tommy's location. Now we eventually head back to where TJ and Cassie are. They're actually heading home, and where Cassie left her bag is inside the bushes, and of course are heading to the bus stop. Cassie and TJ are basically talking about it was really cool to meet the Power Rangers again. So it's like basically seeing superstars for the very first time. But here comes the biggest issue with this scene. Now TJ basically begins talking about, now when I was a kid I always wanted to be a Power Ranger when I grew up. This made absolutely no sense whatsoever. Again, Power Rangers follows the same continuity timeline as we are. A year passes for us, a year passes for them, roughly. Now the problem is, TJ is what at this time? He looks basically like he's in college. He was nowhere near a kid, so this comment made absolutely no sense whatsoever. This comment would have made more sense if Justin said it. So while TJ and Cassie are discussing this, they eventually see that the Petri pod left, slime on the floor, so it makes basically a perfect trail to follow. So of course TJ can't leave anything alone. He decides, I gotta help this friend of theirs. He might be in danger, and of course Cassie's like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'd rather just find my suitcase and go to the bus stop. And TJ and Cassie split up and head in their own directions. Now, eventually the Rangers finally arrive in the city where the Flamite monster is actually attacking the city. Now, I particularly like this moment because, again, they actually are following continuity to what the show has set up. Without Tommy being there, they cannot form the Turbo Megazords. I particularly always like it when they keep things in continuity instead of fudge it in specific ways in order to bypass an issue. Now, of course, since the Flamite monster is large, the Rangers really can't do anything, and they're just basically trying to shoot it with their laser pistols and, of course, worrying about all the civilian people that are running around all over the place. Now, of course, the team splits up. Tanya and Adam are trying to round up all the civilians. Fortunately enough, Carlos and Ashley are helping along. Now, normally I would complain about this because, again, this episode is a pinnacle moment, and of course this involves Carlos, Ashley, TJ, and Cassie. But in this case, I really didn't mind that Carlos and Ashley were omitted from the episode because, again, fortunately enough, Carlos and Ashley did get set up in the beginning of the series, so I didn't really mind that they were missing from this part. Now, I do like to point out one mistake in the episode. Adam left his guard down and accidentally called Carlos his name. One, it basically risks Adam's identity being exposed to Carlos before it really needs to be. And two, Carlos should have said, well, how do you know my name? But no one noticed this. Eventually, we head back to TJ and we basically see him climbing up to the cave where Divatox has left Tommy to die. And of course, at the last minute, Cassie disappears and basically says, I can't leave you alone, I'm your friend. So they both eventually enter the cave themselves together. TJ and Cassie walk in to see Tommy, and of course Tommy's basically confused, like who they are, he doesn't know what's going on. But of course, Cassie and TJ know that must be Tommy and they have to deal with this whole dark void thing. Fortunately enough, again, since Divatox remembered to leave Piranatrons there, they actually begin the fight, TJ and Cassie. While TJ and Cassie are fighting Piranatrons, we head back to the Rangers and basically see what they're going on. Now, I particularly like this moment because, again, we're actually seeing, fire trucks. All the, the normal generic stuff that would be happening in real life. It's really cool to actually see the city, responding to the monster attack. Because a lot of times in PR, we usually do not see this. It's always, focusing on the Power Rangers going into the Zords. We're not actually seeing the repercussions to the city, nor any of, the normal heroes for the city, like the fire department and the police department and paramedics and so on. So as usual, Divatox is trying to, prevent the Rangers from heading to Tommy's location, so she's trying to do anything as possible, and of course, sends out more Piranatrons and actually attacks the fire trucks that are inside the area, while the Flamite monster is destroying the city, causing the Ranger team to split up between trying to deal with civilians and also preventing civilians getting injured or killed by the Piranatrons. Another thing I particularly liked about this episode is that when we headed into the juice bar and we basically see that, the news is covering all the monster attack, which is actually cool. We don't usually see this aspect of PR, that we see that the news reporters are covering the monsters, like as it would be if it was in a real life circumstance. News reports would be covering it. And of course, the scene is to actually showcase that, Carlos and Ashley successfully got all the kids and civilians rounded up inside the juice bar. I basically assume that the juice bar acts as a fallout shelter for the city. When we head back to TJ and Cassie's location, of course, they're having problems with the Piranatrons again. They have no special abilities. TJ notices that the rope that's holding Tommy across the dark void is about to fail. He grabs on, and of course, Cassie and TJ help Tommy get away from the void, finally stopping the Piranatrons and saving Tommy's life. Tommy doesn't know who they are or what happened, how they know he was there, but of course, he thanks them enough. Now, the thing that really kind of bugged me about this point in time is that when Cassie and TJ finally leave Tommy to go their separate ways, Alpha finally decides to contact Tommy right then and there. It just really didn't make any sense why Alpha was just basically ignoring Tommy until they got out of the cave. Perhaps maybe Divatox set up a scrambling device for the communicator so it didn't work until that moment he got out of the cave. So of course, once Tommy gets out of the cave, he eventually morphs and heads right to the Ranger's location. Of course, all the Rangers are very happy that he's finally he's come back. They all form the Turbo Megazord and fight the monster. Now again, just like before, I said that the monster in this episode was particularly for a comedic episode. That's the reason why, if you notice closely, the monster is throwing, all these crates, the rice holding crates at the Turbo Megazord. That's because, again, this episode dealt with more food jokes and other stuff. So eventually, as usual, the obligatory Turbo Megazord finally defeats the monster relatively easy. Now, I also have to complain about another thing about the hourglass. Again, the hourglass is designed to be suspenseful for the show. Again, this is supposed to be a momentous occasion because everyone's transferring their powers and stuff. The thing I really didn't like is that they basically made it that if they fail to locate, the replacement for the people, the world ends and stuff goes to chaos and Demetria can't control it. I always never liked this aspect at all. It really didn't make any sense. I mean, it's transferring powers from a former Ranger to a new Ranger. The last time the Rangers did that, they just simply used a special energy sword to simply copy the powers over to Rocky, Adam, and Aisha. So eventually we head to the juice bar one more time and we basically see that, Carlos and Ashley are taking care of all the civilian people that are inside the juice bar, while Tanya and Adam are peering through the window, basically I assume confirming their choice that, yeah, Carlos and Ashley are worthy enough to be Power Rangers. Now here comes one of the most bizarre moments in the show. Now, of course, everyone remembers that at the beginning of Zeo, when they found the power chamber after the destroyed ruins of the command center, we went into a corridor and it connected to the power chamber. But we never saw this room that's done in this episode. It basically looked like the remnants of the command center. We saw in the background the original star pattern and of course the energy tube to have all the lights on the side. I really never understood where this room came from. Why would they do it here? I mean, again, it's supposed to be kind of like cool and dramatic, but for the show's sake, it doesn't make any sense where it came from. Now, the thing I really find funny for this moment is that, of course, Justin basically says, "What am I, chopped liver?" And basically, he is. Because, frankly, Justin is basically, he was a new character in the beginning of the series, and I can't simply get rid of him as well, so he continues on to being the Blue Ranger. But again, it just shows that, Justin is a pointless character, and they really had nothing for him to do, so he's just basically there. For this episode, I have to give it a 3 out of 5. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't good as part 1. I did like it for the fact, though, it kept most of the story plot points consistent. It had continuity. They dealt with, issues where I would have complained about basically if they formed the Turbo Megazord without the Red Ranger, it would have made no sense whatsoever. I did like how they actually spent the extra money of actually doing, the large, cityscape footage for us specifically, and rather than dealing with, the awkward Car Ranger footage they had, if they had actually been forced to do that. I did like that aspect. I also like how Cassie and TJ were built up in this episode more so because, again, we needed more backstory for them, so it was nice to see those little moments with them. And, of course, including the story points between Carlos and Ashley being built up in the beginning of the series. Now, I also like to point out a couple of things that made Turbo more tolerable in these 2 episodes than more so in other episodes. Notice how Elgar, Rygog, and Porto were hardly or not even used at all in these episodes. They are one of the main reasons why Turbo kind of sucks, is because their characters are beyond dumb to the point of worse than Squat and Babu, to the point you just don't want to see them. So the episode basically felt really good and decent because, again, personally, I don't mind Divatox's character. Yes, a lot of people don't like, the funny, sarcastic. A lot of people particularly don't like Lothor and Ninja Storm. But at least Divatox and Lothor work fine. When you have other characters that constantly keep making the show more stupider and more ridiculous just because, again, Car Rangers was supposed to be lighthearted and funny, it doesn't make the show any better. I do have some particular cringing moments about this episode. Again, where did that bizarre power transfer room come from? At the conclusion of MMPR, the command center was destroyed and of course rebuilt, and I assume, some places would still have the damaged things, but the energy tubes and the star field stuff didn't make any sense being there, and of course, where did those lights come from? It really didn't make any sense whatsoever. It should have been held inside the power changer room directly, and that would have been it. The thing I really hated about this moment is that TJ's comment to Cassie. It just didn't make any sense that TJ said, "When I was a kid, I always wanted to be a predator." It doesn't make any sense. The show at this point in time was only 6 years old. The dude is probably 19, 20. He would have been only, what, 14, 15? You're not really a kid anymore, you're a teenager. What do you guys personally think? Do you think this episode was really amazing because, again, they went over dramatic with, you know, the transferring of the powers? We finally got rid of the old cast members because, frankly, even though I love the old cast members, it's good to have new cast members. The writers didn't want to actually do anything with the old cast members because they're being transferred. Now we're finally actually getting story points. And of course, we're also going to have a little bit more progression with the Justin character. Or do you agree with me that the episode was okay, but it had these weird moments with the transfer room that didn't make any sense? Why that was there, or the TJ comment, or the lack of, you know, Tommy being in the episode. Of course, leave your comments below on what you think on this episode, and of course, leave your suggestion below on what future episodes you would like me to review. For next week's rant, I'll be discussing Mighty Morphin Mutants from the first season of MMPR. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys right back here next week.